Hello everybody, myself Professor Pallavi Kule from Department of Fruit Science, Kekewa College of Horticulture, Nasi. So today we are going to see about windbreaks and shelter belts. First we'll see about the shelter belts. Shelter belts is a wide belt of trees, shrubs and grasses planted in rows which goes right across the land at a right angle to the direction of the prevailing winds to deflect the air current, to reduce the wind velocity, and to give the general protection to the cultivated areas against wind erosion and desiccating effect of the hot winds in the leeward side. A typical shelter belt has a triangular cross section which can be achieved by planting tall trees in the center, flanked on both the sides successively by shorter trees, tall shrubs, and then low spreading shrubs and grasses. The width of shelter belts depends upon the local climatic conditions, wind velocity, and the soil type. Windbreaks. Windbreaks is a protective planting around a garden, a farm, or a field to protect it against strong winds. It usually consists of 2 to 3 rows of the trees or shrubs, spaced at zero point 0.5 meter to 2.5 meter apart, depending on the species. Height and spacing of shelter belts. Height of shelter belt is very important as it affects the distance to which the protection will be afforded on the leeward side. Higher the tree forming the shelter belts, the greater is the zone of influence on the leeward side. This affects the spacing of the shelter belts also. If wind erosion has to be completely controlled, the second belt should be located a little before the place where the wind on the leeward side, often the first shelter belts, assumes the damaging velocity. Taking 20% reduction in wind velocity as the basis of the usefulness of a shelter belt, effective protection zone extends up to 15 to 20 times the height of the belt. In Rajasthan, taking the height of shelter belt to be about 7.5 meter, spacing recommended is 10 times the height, that is 75 meters. Length of shelter belts. The length of shelter belt is an important consideration because at the end of the shelter belt eddies are produced, resulting in increase in wind velocity at these places. It is because of this that the road is not orderly allowed to cross a shelter belts. In some of the western countries, shelter belts have been raised right across the country for the protection they afford. For shorter shelter belts, a minimum length of shelter belt to be the most effective is 24 times its height. Soil preparation. Soil preparation should be done at least a year in advance to build up a sufficient reserves of soil moisture. It may be done either mechanically or by manual labor. Leguminous crops may be raised for the first few years in between the rows of the trees and shrubs for improving the fertility of the soil. Choice of species. Choice of species to be raised in shelter belt is governed by the climate, soil, and topography of the area. It is better to raise the local species because they are easy establishment. Exotics may also be used to improve the efficiency of the shelter belts. Characteristics of tree species used for shelter belt. A species selected should be non-exacting, fast-growing, wind-firm, drought-resistant, unpalatable to animals. It should have a dense crown and low branching habit. It should be leafless at the time when protection is required. It should be economically a multi-purpose species that is fit for firewood, timber, and fodder. The following species are recommended for the creation of the shelter belts, which includes different kinds of grasses, shrubs, small trees, and big trees. Methods of raising the plants. It is better to sow the seeds in polythene bags and plant out the plants so raised. For this purpose, nurseries should be maintained at site. The plant should be regularly watered for 1 or 2 years, properly fenced to protect them from the browsing cattle. Advantages of shelter belts. Very little research work has been done in our country. to find out the benefits of shelter belts on yields of agricultural crops and horticultural crops and grasses. However, on the basis of the research work done in CAZRI, TNAU, and abroad, the following advantages of shelter belts may be mentioned. Moderating effect on temperature. Shelter belts has a moderating effect on air and soil temperature by lowering the maximum and raising the minimum. Temperature during daytime inside the forest is lower. Temperature during night is higher inside the forest than open. Increase in humidity. Shelter belts increase relative humidity from 1 to 50%. There is distinctively perceptible increase in average relative humidity in the agricultural land protected by shelter belts. Reduction in evapotranspiration. Shelter belts reduce evapotranspiration sufficiently in the zone of their influence. Increase in soil moisture. Shelter belts increase the soil moisture content of the soil on the leeward side and delay its drying up during summer. They also increase the underground water supplies by promoting the infiltration in the soil. Reduction in wind velocity and wind erosion. Shelter belts deflect the wind upwards, causes considerable reduction in wind velocity on the leeward side up to a distance of 15 to 20 times the height of the trees forming the shelter belt. As there is considerable reduction in the wind velocity on the leeward side of the shelter belt, wind erosion is very much reduced. Protection of the damage to public and private property. Shelter belts hold up the movement of shifting sand, saves the roads and railway tracks from being covered and otherwise damaged by moving sand dunes. They prevent a deposition of the silt in canals and agricultural fields. Increase in agricultural and horticultural crops. Shelter belts increase the production of agricultural and horticultural crops. Study made in 8 cotton fields in distinctively semi-arid areas of USA revealed an increase of 17.4% in cotton yield when protection against a hot wind was provided by shelter belts. Similar increase in the crop yield has been reported from Russia, where a shelter belt of 5 rows increased the wheat yield by 25 to 28%. Protection of orchards by shelter belt reduces the wind damage and increases the fruit yield. Studies revealed that even if zero point 0.4 hectare out of 4 hectare orchard is devoted in creation of shelter belts, the remaining protected 3.6 hectare of orchard yielded about 13% more than unprotected 4 hectare of orchard. Similarly, the increase in fodder yield is reported to be as high as 300 to 400%. Thank you. This was all about the shelter belts and windbreaks.